Today's Gospel reading is from Luke chapter 15. If you want to follow it in the Pew Bibles, it's on page 100. And just before reading today's passage, which begins at verse 11, can I just take you back to the beginning of the chapter? Luke 15, verse 1, which says this: "One day when many tax collectors and other outcasts came to listen to Jesus, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law started grumbling and saying, 'This man welcomes outcasts and even eats with them.'" And it's in response to that complaint that Jesus tells this parable, and very cleverly Luke has gathered three stories together, all with the same theme of something precious that is lost, that is then found, and the finding results in a party. And the most developed and probably the most famous of the three is our reading today, reading from verse 11. Jesus went on to say, "There was once a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one came to him and said, 'Dad, give me my share of the property now.' And so the man divided his property between his 2 sons. And after a few days, the younger son sold his part of the property and left home with the money. He went to a country far away where he wasted his money in reckless living. He spent everything he had. And then a severe famine spread over that country, and he was left without a thing. And so he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out to his farm to take care of the pigs. He wished he could fill himself with the bean pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. And at last he came to his senses and said, 'All my father's hired workers have more than they can eat, and here I am about to starve. I will get up and go to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I am no longer fit to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired workers.' And so he got up and started back to his father. Now he was still a long way off from home when his father saw him. His heart was filled with pity, and he ran and threw his arms around his son and kissed him. 'Father,' the son said, 'I have sinned against God and against you. I am no longer fit to be called your son.' But the father would have none of it. He called his servants. 'Hurry,' he said, 'bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Then go and get the prize calf and kill it, and let us celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead, but now he is alive. He was lost, but now has been found.' And so the feasting began. But in the meantime, the elder son was out in the field. On his way back, as he came close to the house, he heard the music and the dancing. And so he called one of the servants and asked him, 'What's going on?' 'Your brother has come back home,' the servant answered, 'and your father has killed the prize calf because he got him back safe and sound.' The elder brother was so angry that he wouldn't even go into the house. So his father came out and begged him to come in. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have worked for you like a slave. I have never disobeyed your orders. And what have you given me? Not even a goat for me to have a feast with my friends. But this son of yours wasted all your property on prostitutes. And when he comes back home, you kill the prize calf for him.' 'My son,' the father answered, 'you are always here with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be happy, because your brother was dead, but now is alive. He was lost, but now has been found.'" This is the gospel of Christ. Praise to you, O Lord. Just before saying a few words about this passage, can I thank all of you who supported us on Thursday? It was a very difficult occasion, obviously, but it was a very special one as well. And if you were there, thank you so much. The support we have had has been nothing short of astonishing and very humbling, and we are more grateful than we can say. If by any chance any of you took 6 copies of the Order of Service away with you, we'd gladly have 5 of them back. One of the mistakes I made on the day was I ordered rather too few. I was stupid enough to go by the number of people who actually said they were coming. Always a mistake, and we did run short. We've got a couple left, but please keep the one that you've got if you want to do that. But if by any chance you've got 3 and can spare one, we'd be grateful. 3 parables gathered together, Luke 15, all about something lost, found, celebration. The shepherd who loses his sheep, the woman who loses her coin, and you think, what's the big deal about that? Until you actually look at the word that's used in the Greek for coin, and it's one of the coins she would have been given as a marriage gift. So it's a bit like losing her engagement ring. But then the third, and as I say, probably the most famous and certainly the most developed of the 3 stories, the story of the lost son, as it is here, which is a good title for it, because of course we all know it as the story of the prodigal son, and of course none of us know what prodigal means. You want a good pub quiz question, by the way, and if you want to embarrass your Christian friends, what does prodigal mean? To spare your blushes, of course, it means extravagant, but often in a quite negative way. It can be extravagant in the sense of wasteful. But prodigal is essentially extravagant. It can be both positive and negative. And we might observe, therefore, in passing, that you could equally call this the parable of the prodigal father, because it's he as well who is extravagant and wasteful, although in a rather more sort of creative way. And I took the liberty of starting with verse 1 of the chapter, because that context is really, really important. The backdrop to this, as I'm sure you know by now, is the whole thing of Jewish dietary law and the fact that the law, as they understood it, forbade a Jew to eat with non-Jews, with Gentiles, particularly those who earned their living in some kind of immoral way, a way that was contrary to the teaching of God, hence tax collectors and sinners. You could say, well, we're all sinners. Yes, it's not using it in that quite in that sense. These are people who quite knowingly and deliberately were leading some kind of immoral life. And they are the people, of course, that Jesus hangs around with, because in spiritual terms, they are the lost. And as Jesus will say elsewhere to his followers, I didn't come to save the healthy and to save the saved. I came to save the lost. And it's to them that Jesus goes, because it's them particularly that it's they particularly who need him. And of course, this causes genuine shock and outrage amongst the Pharisees, that group who were particularly committed to the keeping of the law. Excuse me. So it's the Pharisees and the teachers of the law started grumbling. You can bet they weren't the only ones. All those who were righteous, those who were really trying to live by the law of God, said, oi, this isn't on. This guy claims to be a righteous teacher of the law, and look what he's doing. He's flouting the very teachings he says he's here to uphold. Oh, yummy, say the Pharisees, good evidence that he's not the Son of God at all. This was precisely the kind of incriminating evidence that they were on the lookout for. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Jesus of Nazareth. Do you know the one I mean? 1980, with Robert Powell as Jesus. And we all know, of course, that Jesus looked exactly like Robert Powell, so that's great. He does make a very good Jesus, I must say. It's a film not without its faults, but what it gets right, it gets very right. There's a fairly acute theological brain at work behind Jesus of Nazareth. If you've never seen it, it is a very good film. It's a very, very good attempt to kind of portray the gospel story. And I think one of the things they do best, that's always stayed with me, is the way that they do this parable. It is slightly speculative, but it absolutely works. Do you remember that one of the disciples was Matthew, not the Matthew who wrote the gospel as far as we know, but Matthew the tax collector? Now you remember the tax collectors, these were Jewish people who were working for the Romans, so traitors to their people. They were collecting money for the Romans, so doubly unpopular, and they were probably making a nice little earner out of it themselves, so triply unpopular. They really were the dregs. You know, tax collectors today are good, honest people doing a fine job of work. Yes, indeed. And but they weren't in those days. I mean, they really were utterly despised, and not without reason, you have to say. Jesus calls Matthew. Now, I'm sorry, you know, you're picking disciples. You don't go and pick a tax collector, you know. I mean, that's like picking a Daily Mail journalist. I mean, give me strength. You know, you know, it is the least likely. So why? Why does he do it? Now, you know, one of the things I absolutely love about Jesus, he's got this extraordinary insight into what really makes people tick. And is it that he has seen in Matthew a certain kind of, not reluctance, but a certain sorrow about the job he's found himself doing, a sorrow about the way that he's ended up, a longing perhaps for a way back? Pure speculation, but something, you know, made Jesus say. And of course, the thing that he says to Matthew is, I will come to your house and eat with you. Now, you know, the next sound you hear is that of Matthew picking his jaw off the ground. Because here is a teacher of the law, you know, a man whose reputation is fast becoming established, who's, you know, getting the reputation that Jesus has, and he wants to come and eat with Matthew. And such a thing is impossible. And Matthew is actually thrilled. And so in the film, Jesus of Nazareth, you have Jesus going around to Matthew's place, pursued by all the sort of, not pursued by, but with the disciples and all the rest, following him, saying, Lord, you can't do this. You cannot do this. It's against the law. It will compromise your mission. If you do this and get your hands dirty, it's you know, people just aren't going to listen to you. They're not going to take you seriously. Don't do it. And Jesus saying to them, Peter, or was it James? Can't remember. The heart of the law is mercy. And so he goes and he comes to this great sort of lit barn, and it's full of, you know, dregs and lowlifes and prostitutes and tax collectors and, you know, sort of place we all used to seek out on a Saturday night, you know. And he goes in, and all the others kind of stand by the door, sort of, you know, we daren't, dare we, you know. And it's in the context of that gathering in the film that he tells this story. And I think that's genius. I think that absolutely works, because there you have got a group of people whose roots were with the Father, whose roots were in the faith, who have gone astray. And yes, they are materially prosperous. Yes, they've got all the exciting stuff. They've got the drink, the drugs, the food, you know, the loose living, all the rest of it. The sort of thing that does occupy a large part of the pleasure agenda of our world as well. It's never been any different, actually. It's kind of, you know, that's been in the human genes ever since. And yet, Matthew and possibly others who actually would love to find a way back from that if they only knew how they could do it. Because there's going to be nobody in the Jewish community who's going to make it easy for them. And so it's in that context, is it? I can well believe that it might have been that Jesus tells the story of the son who came and asked his father for his share of the inheritance, sold up, cashed it in, went away, and blew it on all the things that he thought that our world thinks were supposed to bring you pleasure. You know, travel, gambling, loose women, food, da-da-da-da-da. And found that they didn't satisfy, found that they ran out, found that the relationships built on those evaporated as soon as the money was gone, and found himself really in the absolute pits And Jesus makes it as unpleasant as he can, because not only is the guy homeless, not only has he got no income, but the one job that he can get is feeding the one animal that a good Jew would not want to feed. It's a pig. Yeah, working with the unclean. So he has really reached rock bottom. And how many others that Jesus was speaking to might have been in that similar situation? As I say, we don't know that was the setting, but it would, that absolutely, rings true to me. And if it wasn't, then it was a setting very similar to that, surely. An appeal to those who had kind of lost their way. And I don't know about you, but I do run into quite a lot of people, and the conversation sort of begins, oh, I used to go to church until, or I did once believe, but then, something happened. And I wonder if there's anyone that we know who might just be in a kind of parallel situation, who would love a kind of a way back. And I'm not quite sure what happened to Back to Church Sunday. Do we know what happened to Back to Church Sunday? Do you remember Back to Church Sunday? 2 years ago? 3 years ago? It was a genius idea. It was a really, really good idea to have one Sunday where the focus was on inviting people who'd kind of slipped away. And no, they probably weren't hanging out in the opium dens of Long Eaton, Not that I would know, because I never go. But do you know what I mean? Because I think that's what often happens to people. When the living is easy, to quote the song, people just kind of slip away almost by neglect. It doesn't always take a crisis. In fact, a crisis would probably bring them back. It's just when it's just all a bit ordinary and we're just all plodding along, as Jesus and the disciples must have done on many occasions. They're just hiking across Galilee and no one been healed recently, and here we go, it's another day on the move. And a lot of the Christian life is that. It's just getting on faithfully with the everyday tasks. And it's not spectacular. And some people, just because life is like that sometimes, they kind of drift away. And I wonder if there are those who might come back. But there will be those also in much deeper need, much deeper crisis. And I think it's to them that this parable speaks. Because the prodigal son, he hits rock bottom. He uses up all the resources that he has at his disposal and finds that ultimately they don't satisfy. And of course, the thing about hitting rock bottom is, God willing, you discover that at the bottom there is a rock. He hasn't discovered that yet, but it actually brings him to his knees and to his senses. And he says, this is bonkers, except he says it in Hebrew. Hebrew for bonkers, anybody? No, I don't know either. My father's servants eat better than this. They're fed, they're clothed, they don't have to feed pigs. What am I doing here? What am I doing? And it's that sends him on the road home. And here's the father. Why on earth did the father let him go in the first place? Well, you can push the parable too far and analyze every detail, but I think that is an interesting question. The father lets him go. He's been very rude to his father. To come and ask for your share of an inheritance before father dies is not a nice thing to do. Becky tries that one, and, I won't repeat in church what I shall say to her. You know what I mean? It's not a nice thing to do. But the father shares out, and off he goes. And, without that, the parable doesn't work. But is there something also about allowing the young man to find himself? And I'm sure I've quoted this one before. There is a wonderful, wonderful poem by Cecil Day Lewis, and it's called For Sean, and it's for her, I think it's for his son. If it's not, it's his grandson. Going off on his first day to boarding school, because that's what they did. And he watches the young boy going away from him and heading off into this strange place on his own. And he said it absolutely gets him at a gut level. But the poem ends, this shows what perhaps only God himself could perfectly show, that selfhood begins with a walking away. and love is proved in the letting go. It's the most beautiful poem. Selfhood begins with a walking away, and love is proved in the letting go. Maybe that's a little bit of what the Father is doing with the Son here. You know, he's letting him go so that he can hopefully find himself. And the lovely thing, of course, is that when the Son returns, the Father is watching for him. He has never given up hope, which has been a bit of a theme for us in recent days. He has never given up hope that the Son might return, that might come back. He doesn't know what kind of a person he's going to be, but he sees him when he is a long way off. Now, you don't see him if he's a long way off unless you are watching. And of course, what Jesus is telling us is that the Father is always watching for the returning child, the returning son, the returning daughter, in the hope that the sons and daughters who have gone astray will come back. But like the father of the parable, he will never compel. He will never march out and drag him back by the scruff of the neck. He will let him come back of his own free will, in his own time, or not at all. Just as God does with us. We are invited. We are never forced. But when he does come back, son comes back and says he's sorry, little prepared speech probably. Father will have none of it. Best robe, best ring, kill the fatted calf, party. Yeah? Wonderful. Because in all three of these parables, when the thing that is lost is found, there is a celebration. And it's Jesus' thing that there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than there is over 100 righteous people. When the lost is found again, when the one who has gone astray comes back, then the angels break out the champers and have a party, and quite right too. Can you imagine Matthew and his bunch of cronies hearing that story? And the tug at the heartstrings that it must have been for them to realize that maybe there was a way back. Maybe the door could be opened. Maybe they could leave this life that perhaps they themselves had come to despise. They could leave it behind and get back to the proper relationship with their own community, but also with their Heavenly Father that had been lost. But let's not forget that standing at the door are the righteous who won't come in. Poking their heads around the door. Ooh, he's actually eating with sinners, And this, as I say, this isn't snobbery. This is nothing sort of, social snobbery. This is a real offense at what they saw as a breaking of the law. The elder brother comes back. Party going on. Celebration. Lights, party poppers, balloons. What's going on? He makes inquiry. And the servant, who sounds pretty excited about it, says, "Your brother's come back, and your father has killed the prize calf because he got him back safe and sound." And the elder brother was so angry that he wouldn't even go into the house. He's given a party for that. He's absolutely furious. It is the outrage of the self-righteous. The ones who've always done it by the book, always kept the law, and who have a profound sense of what is just and what is fair. And he doesn't actually say it, but you can bet he was thinking it. It's not fair. And he goes and he lays into his dad, "All these years I've worked for you like a slave. I've never disobeyed your orders. What have you given me? Not even a goat to have a feast with my friends. But," and I love this son of yours, not my brother, this son of yours, he doesn't have a name either, you'll notice. This thing that the cat's dragged back turns up. Oh, and apparently we've got to kill the fatted calf for him, have we? And it's the voice of righteous indignation. It's the voice, as I say, of those who think it's not fair. And of course, he's right. Because love isn't fair. Whoever said love was fair? When we do things out of love for somebody, we don't do it because it's fair. We do it because we love them. And the more we love them, the more extravagant we are likely to be. And the father pleads with him. And of course, delightfully, Jesus is a wonderful storyteller. He doesn't tell us whether the elder brother ever gets over it. He doesn't tell us whether the elder brother actually does go in. I wonder if the penny dropped for the people who were listening at the door, who won't come in. And I won't tell you how that scene ends in the film. I'll leave you to watch it, because it's a brilliant ending to that particular scene in the film. They do it very, very cleverly. But we're left hanging. Does he get over it, or does the self-righteous indignation triumph? And so you have to ask yourself at the end, if this is the parable of the lost son, who is the most lost? Which son is lost? Because yes, one was, but he's found. He has come back. He's come to his senses. He's come to himself. He has come back into the relationship of love with the Father that he has realized is the single most important thing. And the other one hasn't got there yet. He's done it all by the book. He's done absolutely, the good and proper and righteous thing. And in a sense, we understand his sense of indignation, because it isn't fair. But that sense of the wonder of something lost returning and how wonderful that is just hasn't got as far as his heart as yet. And so yes, it's the parable of the lost son. Actually, it's the parable of two lost sons. It's the parable of the prodigal son. But it's also the parable of the prodigal father, who lavishes the very, very best that he has on those who come back to him. It's a lovely message to be able to share with people, isn't it? Amen.